This episode's sponsored by War Thunder.
Dread it. Run from it. Napoleon still arrives, Nick.
Is waiting.
Do Napoleon, you coward!
Napoleon calls, brother. You must answer.
Napoleon!
Can't run from Napoleon forever, Nick.
Napoleon!
All right, I'll do it. I'm going to be honest, guys, in over 10 years doing history buffs, I don't think I've seen a more inaccurate movie than this one. Braveheart, The Patriot, Elizabeth, and Elizabeth the Golden Age, none of them hold a candle to this stinker. Not even the other two Ridley Scott movies I've done, like 1492 or Robin Hood, pissed me off even half as much. And I know I'm not the only one. Judging by the volume of comments flooding my channel every day, it's clear we're all united in our hatred for this movie.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
For history buffs, the Napoleonic era is a fascinating period. Not since Alexander the Great or Julius Caesar has such a man reshaped Europe. As a self-made emperor, Napoleon was both a revolutionary reformer and military genius whose campaigns are still studied in war colleges to this day. And yet, none of the qualities that made the man are explored here. Instead, Ridley Scott was more interested in either dragging his name in the mud or just flat out making shit up for the sake of whatever narrative he wanted to tell. Sometimes I think he's doing this on purpose just to provoke us. Because when presented with all of Napoleon's historical inaccuracies, his response to all his history buffs was to get a life. Well, joke's on you, Ridley, because this is my life. I literally make a living roasting your revisionist history. So for the sake of fairness, and to give his vision a chance, I'll be reviewing the extended director's cut, adding another whopping 48 minutes to the runtime. So let's not waste another second, let's dive in and untangle this mess. Let's find out how much of this film is fact, and how much is fiction, and through all its inaccuracies, what was the real history of France's greatest general. This is Napoleon. So the movie begins with an opening title card stating it's 1789 and revolution is in France. We get some brief written exposition about the state of the country, food shortages, and anti-royalist sentiment. We then cut to a few quick shots of Queen Marie Antoinette with her children in Versailles just before being confronted by revolutionary crowds, which did actually happen in October 1789 when she and King Louis XVI were forced to leave Versailles and moved to the Tuileries Palace in Paris. So far so good, this is all true, but not even 20 seconds go by before we get our very first inaccuracy. You see, right after the opening text, we cut straight to Marie Antoinette being taken to the guillotine, which absolutely did not happen in 1789. That was nearly 4 years later, on October 16th, 1793. And don't try to excuse this as, well, maybe this part is meant to be 1793, they just didn't show a date. It's not. Because just 16 minutes later, the film gives us an official time jump and it says September 1793. And it's not just the date that's wrong. For example, we see her wearing a velvet black dress when she actually wore a plain white one, which was the traditional mourning colours of French queens. And she didn't have long hair when her head was chopped off. It was customary to cut it all off so it didn't get caught in the blade. But you know what really takes the piss? Is that once the deed is done, it cuts to Napoleon in the crowd watching, when he wasn't even there. When Marie Antoinette was executed in 1793, Napoleon wasn't even in Paris. Jesus Christ, how much longer do we have? 3 hours and 20 minutes? The whole movie's gonna be like this, isn't it? I'm doomed. Now, after Marie Antoinette's execution, the film cuts to Robespierre talking to what I can only assume is the Committee on Public Safety about what Marie Antoinette was guilty of. But didn't they just chop her head off? I mean, what's the point of discussing her crimes after she's already dead?
It is therefore an emanation of virtue. Now, she was guilty of 3 charges against you.
In the midst of Robespierre's pointless recap, Napoleon walks through the crowd with his brother Lucien, and though we only see one in the movie, Napoleon had 4 brothers. All of them played major roles in his life and held significant positions of power in his future dynasty. But for the movie, all of the brothers are condensed into just one, Lucien. So they're both here to meet with Paul Barras, who, at the time, was a rising figure in the revolutionary government, and they discuss how the British Royal Navy have taken the port city of Toulon in southern France, and half the French fleet is in danger of being destroyed. By the end of the conversation, the Bonapartes convince Barras that Napoleon is the right man to take it back.
And how do you propose to take the hub?
Capture the fort that dominates the harbor, and you have the city.
But here's what's wrong with the scene. Prior to Toulon, Napoleon wasn't anywhere near Barras or high command. He was in Corsica visiting family on sick leave, something he did a lot in his early career. But by the end of his stay, it had become clear that it was no longer safe. The political situation on the island had grown dangerous due to rising tensions from the French Revolution, especially with the split between the Corsican nationalists and French Republicans. So they all packed up and moved to France as political refugees. Napoleon rejoined his artillery regiment at Nice, then was transferred to the Army of the South, and because of his background in artillery, was appointed Major of the 2nd Regiment of Artillery. Napoleon was eventually given command of all the artillery outside Toulon, in part because he knew the right people, but also because France had been depleted many of its finest officers, either by mass immigration or guillotining of the aristocracy. Merit became the new order of the day, not status. And at Toulon, Napoleon was able to show off many of his great skills and character traits: organization, communication, leadership, and whip the 2nd Regiment into fighting shape. By the end of the siege, Napoleon had been promoted to Brigadier General and had earned the respect of his men, those in his command, but also his superiors. So at no point was Napoleon ever given command of the Toulon siege by Barras in Paris. And check out the reason why Barras gives Napoleon command.
My brother, Captain Bonaparte, as artillery officer, has organized heated shots against English ships.
What does that even mean? Heated shots, like hot shots, cannonballs heated in a furnace before firing at a ship? That's not exactly revolutionary. Any trained artillery officer knew how to load a sodding cannon. Why would that make him uniquely qualified to break this siege? You see, this is what frustrates me about this movie. None of this adds to Napoleon's legend, and doesn't establish anything for the narrative that couldn't have been done with real history, and has actually opened up so many plot holes and inconsistencies because of the way they cobbled the whole thing together. Take the siege for example. When Napoleon arrives in Toulon in the movie, the on-screen title says 16th of December 1793, which doesn't make a lick of sense. You want to know why? Because we're shown a montage immediately afterwards. We see his men collecting scrap iron to mold cannons, and Napoleon scouting the fort. The implication is that some time passes, right? That's the whole point of a montage. But here's the problem. In real life, Napoleon attacked the fort that very night. Are we seriously meant to believe that in just 12 hours he whipped his men into shape, cast artillery, planned an assault, and captured the fort? Not even the real Napoleon could do that. His actual success at Toulon came because he had been in command since October. He spent months preparing for that assault. His victory was the result of careful planning and skill. Anyway, on the night the assault begins, we see Napoleon charge forward, only for his horse to take a cannonball to the chest and collapse in a gory pile. A bloody Napoleon gets up, rejoins the battle, and helps his men take the fort. But did this happen in real life? Well, according to historian Andrew Roberts, who wrote an incredible book on Napoleon, Roberts notes that his horse was indeed shot out from underneath him, and we also know that Napoleon helped load and fire a cannon when an artilleryman near him was killed. He was also wounded by an English gunner who ran a pike into his left thigh. So, credit where credit's due here. The film's depiction of Napoleon taking part in the battle is actually accurate in this case. So after reaching the cannons, Napoleon orders them to be aimed at the British ships and fired. We then see more or less the entire fleet engulfed in flames, which is inaccurate. Now, to be fair, Napoleon himself was no stranger to exaggeration. In almost everything he did, he inflated numbers or outcomes for political gain. Decades later, he even boasted that all of the British ships were on fire at Toulon, but in reality, it was just 2. The next morning, Napoleon is promoted to Brigadier General. In reality, it was a few days after the siege, but it's close enough. But Barras wasn't the one to do it, he was still in Paris. But honestly, I'm less bothered by that than I am by this.
For Mother.
That's psychotic. That's so much worse than the letter. Like, I'm sorry, but what? This never happened. What a bizarre thing to add. No message, no poster note, just send a bloody cannonball to mum, eh? So after Toulon, we're back in Paris, and this time the title card tells us it's September 1793, which is pretty confusing because just a few scenes ago it was December 1793. So why are we suddenly going backwards in time? Because this scene, my friends, is from the shitty director's cut. It's meant to be the grand introduction of Napoleon's love interest, Josephine, but it's been sloppily edited. It takes place before Toulon, but the film sets it after. It's almost as if the editor accidentally dropped it somewhere in the timeline and just couldn't be asked to fix it. In any case, we're now watching a man interrogate a little girl who turns out to be Hortense, Josephine's daughter and Napoleon's future stepdaughter. For some reason, she's 5 in the movie, but in real life, she was actually 10. Then again, the movie messes up everyone's age.
You know your father's under arrest.
He's a prisoner.
Do you know why?
Because he's a noble. My father is for the revolution. So am I.
Don't lie to me or I will hurt you.
So she is 5 years old. She's not lying. My husband fought on your side.
Now, the scene gives the impression that Josephine's arrest was tied to this moment, but in reality, it happened months later. You see, both Josephine and her first husband, Alexandre, were arrested in April 1794 as part of a broad suite of nobles under the law of suspects. He was executed on July 23rd, and she remained in prison until all remaining prisoners were released on July 28th, when the Reign of Terror ended. It at least got the hair right, though. Josephine did cut hers off in prison, something known as the coiffure à la victime. As her friend Teresa explains,
they say the blade of the guillotine can get caught in your hair.
But wait a minute, the movie isn't following its own logic here, because Marie Antoinette's hair wasn't cut in her execution scene at the beginning of the movie. So Josephine gets an historically accurate haircut, but Marie Antoinette doesn't. That's some selective realism there. We then fast forward to some more executions, and the titles on screen tells us it's April 1794. So, in the film's version of events, Josephine's been rotting in prison for months now, but in reality, this was the month and year she was actually arrested. And the scene before made it seem like she was about to be executed, but then it just abandons her storyline entirely. Instead, we cut to a group of nuns being marched to the guillotine, singing as they go. The faces in the crowd watching gives us the idea that perhaps we're at a turning point with all this death. We're killing nuns now? These people don't seem to have the same revolutionary vigor and bloodlust they had with Marie Antoinette's beheading. But did something like this actually happen? A mass execution of nuns? Well, the answer is yes. 16 Carmelite sisters were guillotined for refusing to renounce their religious vows, and they really did sing hymns on their way to the scaffold. And the deaths became a powerful symbol of the Terror's madness. However, they were executed in July 1794, not April as the movie tells us. Meanwhile, Napoleon's back in Paris and is having an emergency meeting with Barras about how the Reign of Terror is spiraling out of control.
The current leadership of France has passed from enthusiasm to reckless ambition. And the public perception of the guillotine is lawless passion, led by Robespierre. He is unfit to rule.
What the fuck?
Bonaparte.
Friends! It has become increasingly clear!
No. Don't cut yet. What the hell was that? The man's asleep during a national crisis. Does no one else think this is weird? I mean, what is Ridley Scott trying to say in this movie? That Napoleon suffered from narcolepsy? Highly doubt he conquered Europe with that little ailment. Or maybe this movie is so boring, not even its own protagonist can stay awake.
Now there he is. He appears to be just sleeping.
Anyway, after his little nap, we see the assembly yelling at Robespierre. Barras joins in, and the whole crowd gets fired up, which inevitably turns into a riot. Robespierre tries to run, but is cornered, and when his pistol misfires on the mob, he pulls out another and shoots himself beneath his jaw. Now this did happen, but not in the assembly hall. It happened later in the Hotel de Ville. But that's not what should bother you about this scene.
What the fuck are you doing?
I know, right? This never happened. Why did he do that? Was it in the script? Or did the actor just give in to an impulsive thought? So after some finger action, Robespierre's bandaged up and brought to the guillotine to be executed. Now this did happen, but not in April. He was beheaded on July 28, 1794, and it signified the end of the Reign of Terror. And yet in the movie, the title on screen tells us End of the Reign of Terror, July 27th, 1794. Why, Ridley? Why? Why did you need to get it wrong by a single day? Then again, for this movie, that's practically a win by this point. But hey, at least Josephine's finally released from prison, so she can hurry up and meet Napoleon to end this mess. God help us. We're only 20 minutes in, and I already want to turn it off. But you know what I wouldn't want to turn off? The sponsor for today's episode, War Thunder! War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, and is available for free right now on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and mobile. You can take command of over 2,500 vehicles across 10 major nations, ranging from early biplanes and armored cars of the 1920s, all the way up to modern fighter jets, helicopters, warships, and battle tanks. What really sets War Thunder apart is its combat. There are no simple hit points. Every vehicle is modeled down to its individual components. Engines, fuel tanks, weapons, crew, and different shells and armor behave like their real-world counterparts. Immerse yourself in the intense combat of War Thunder, where incredibly detailed vehicles, realistic graphics, and authentic sound effects place you right at the helm of the most powerful war machines of our time. And when a vehicle is destroyed, the X-ray damage view shows you exactly what happened, where the shell penetrated, what it hit, and why that vehicle didn't survive. There's a game mode for everyone. Arcade if you want fast-paced action, Simulate if you want full realism, and Realistic mode, which strikes a great balance between intensity and authenticity. And you can now take the battlefield anywhere, with the all-new mobile version on Apple and Android, featuring ground, sea and air battles with massive multiplayer combat. With over 95 million players worldwide and tons of high-quality content, there really isn't a better game for fans of military history. Now make sure you use my links in the pinned comment or video description to play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox or mobile. And if you're a new player or you're returning on PC or console after at least 6 months, you'll also receive a massive bonus pack for a limited time when you sign up using my link. That bonus includes multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator, Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium account. So in the next scene, the movie introduces us to the Survivors' Ball in the summer of 1794, which, of course, is wrong. The Bal des Victimes were supposedly exclusive parties held after the Reign of Terror, and you could only get in if you were related to someone who'd been guillotined, sort of like a VIP club for the traumatized nobility. So it doesn't make sense for Napoleon to be here with Barras. But here's the main issue. If these parties were real, which many historians doubt they were anything more than gossip at the time, they certainly wouldn't take place that same summer. I mean, it's a bit ballsy, don't you think? Just because we know the Reign of Terror ended with Robespierre's execution doesn't mean they did, and throwing a bash celebrating just a few weeks later would have been very premature and dangerous. The earliest mention of a survivor's ball in real life took place in early 1795, which makes far more sense. By then, mass execution stopped long enough for people to feel safe again. But putting that aside, did Ridley Scott at least try to get the look of the survivor's ball right? Sort of, but it's more stylized than accurate. The women wear Greco-Roman dresses, which were daring at the time, sheer, clingy, and low cut, so that checks out. Until we see a naked woman playing the cello. And I tried to find any account of nudity at these parties and found nothing. In real life, the dresses alone were scandalous enough. Then there's this weird bit with a male opera singer performing entirely in falsetto, which is when a man sings in an unnaturally high-pitched voice, often reaching to the soprano range, and he does it the entire time. That look on his face was mine in the cinema. And just so we're clear, no, men didn't sing like this back then. Falsetto wasn't used as a formal style, and certainly not as a solo performance at an upper-class ball. The guy would have been laughed out of the room and was assumed to be taking the piss. But we're not done there, folks. As cringy as that was, it doesn't hold a candle to the next scene. This is meant to be a survivor's ball, right? Everyone here has lost family to the guillotine. So why are they all laughing, singing, and applauding a puppet show of Marie Antoinette's execution? These people are supposed to be grieving nobles, not giddy Jacobins. Honestly, the scene is more tone-deaf than that opera singer. In any case, it's at this wildly inappropriate puppet show where Napoleon first lays eyes on Josephine, seated next to Barras. Now, it's true that Napoleon did meet Josephine at a ball hosted by Barras, but it wasn't a survivor's ball, and it happened in 1795. And yes, she was briefly Barras' mistress that summer, but I digress. So our Napoleon is supposedly so enchanted by Josephine that he follows her about the party and just gawks at her from across the room. So subtly, in fact, that Josephine spots it right away.
Why are you staring at me?
Am I?
Yes?
I was not.
Oh, you weren't.
I was.
This right here is the heart of the movie. Not Napoleon's military genius, not his social and economic reforms, nope, it is this great sweeping romance between Napoleon and Josephine, and takes up the bulk of the movie's runtime and focus. Even the director's cut is just more scenes with them, and none of them add anything. But if you're going to focus so much on this couple, then at least make their relationship engaging. Dude, what the fuck is wrong with you? Stop staring at her!
What are you doing? Are you staring at them? Stop it. Dude, stop it. You stop looking at stop.
I have never felt more uncomfortable watching a love story develop than theirs. Josephine looks like she can barely tolerate him, and Napoleon just comes across as an awkward creep. Not once do you feel any warmth, affection, or passion in their scenes together.
When you look at me, do you see an aristocrat?
No.
Wait a minute, is that the song from Pride and Prejudice? Oh my god, it is. That's Dawn by Dario Marinelli, the original score for 2005's Pride and Prejudice. This movie is so emotionally bankrupt, it had to pinch the soundtrack from someone else's love story. So Josephine clearly wants to get with Napoleon because it would be good for her financially. Fine, the real Josephine did the same thing. But she didn't do it by warning Napoleon how many men she slept with in prison trying to get pregnant. This was to survive the guillotine, of course, but still, men love hearing about that on a first date.
Does where I have been concern you?
No, madame.
If you look down, you'll see a surprise. And once you see it, you will always want it.
What are we even watching here? This is supposed to be a movie about Napoleon Bonaparte, one of the greatest conquerors in history, a man who rose from obscurity to become Emperor of France. But instead we get this awkward weirdo who stares too much.
Look how they massacred my boy.
We then cut to Napoleon and Barras talking about a royalist uprising which occurred on October 5th, 1795. Now this was a big moment in Napoleon's career. Barras made him second in command, and told him to use any and all means necessary to stop it. So I'm not sure why Napoleon the movie says this.
I will not lead a second in command.
But you were second in command. So just like we see in the movie, Napoleon chose to use cannons against the insurrectionists, something never done before against civilians in Paris. But it wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, it was something Napoleon had fantasized about for years. You see, back on June 20th, 1792, Napoleon was appalled when a mob stormed the Tuileries Palace to confront the king and queen, without a single shot fired against them. He later told a friend, "What madness! How could they allow that rabble to enter? Why did they not sweep away 400 or 500 of them with cannon? Then the rest would take themselves off very quickly." Well, 3 years later, he'd get his chance. Napoleon chose canister shot for the grisly task. Hundreds of musket balls stuffed into a metal case that would rip open once it left the cannon's muzzle, sending those lead balls flying out like a shotgun. Napoleon later explained to his brother Joseph, "If you treat the mob with kindness, these creatures fancy themselves invulnerable." Napoleon's ruthlessness paid off. His whiff of canister shots made sure no Parisian mob dared take to the streets again for another 30 years. Overall, the depiction is okay, but like the rest of the movie, it happens out of order. They did get the date right though, October 5th, 1795, but this was before he even met Josephine, speaking of whom we see their wedding in the next scene. Napoleon and Josephine got married on March 9th, 1796, and the movie manages to botch a few important details.
Marie Joseph Rose Tacher, born 23rd June 1767 in Martinique, accepts as her husband Napoleon Bonaparte, born February 1768 in Ajaccio, Corsica.
Would you be surprised to learn these dates are wrong? Napoleon was born August 15th, 1769, not February 1768. Josephine was born June 23rd, 1763, not 1767. Now to be fair, in real life, they both lied about their birth years on the marriage certificate, most likely to close the 6-year age gap and make it look like they were both 28. But of the two in the movie, Napoleon's the only one who also changes the year and month he was born. Why? Was lying about their age not enough? Did Josephine go, "Oh Napoleon, can we change your star sign too? I'm a Cancer and I just don't see myself with a Leo"? The sheer volume of inaccuracies in this movie is exhausting. You can't go more than a few minutes without spotting something wrong. And I'm not alone who noticed. Here's what Napoleonic historian Andrew Roberts had to say.
How much of the film is, what in your terms, accurate?
Of the 2 hours, 38 minutes, I'd say 38 minutes. These are meant to be entertainments, of course. They're not documentaries. You're not expected to have everything absolutely accurate. But Ridley Scott didn't call his show a generic French 19th century emperor, did he? He actually called it Napoleon. So I think it's right. It's okay for us to say what's accurate.
Two days after getting married, Napoleon heads off to Italy, as he was given command of the French army of Italy because of how well he handled the royalist insurrection. Now, we're never told any of this or the reason why. It just cuts to Napoleon in Milan amongst cheering crowds, and the titles only say, "Conquest of Italy." Well, that's a bit vague, isn't it? Napoleon didn't just decide to invade Italy. He was ordered to by the French ruling government, the Directory. France at this time was fighting for its survival in the First War of the Coalition. Nearly every major European power had joined forces to crush the revolution and restore the French monarchy. Most of the fighting had been against Austria in the Netherlands and the Rhineland. Napoleon's mission was to lead a second front against Austria and his allies in northern Italy. But here's the thing, nobody expected much. Italy was considered a sideshow. Napoleon was only given 40,000 francs, less than his own annual pension, to fund the entire campaign. However, Napoleon accepted his orders without complaint and in fact with great zeal. For example, Napoleon was 2 hours late to his own wedding because he was preparing for his upcoming campaign. Napoleon was a meticulous planner and it showed in his many, many victories. When he arrived to find the army of Italy starving, undersupplied, and demoralized, Napoleon scrambled to secure emergency funds and whipped them into a disciplined professional force. No part of his soldiers' lives or welfare escaped his concern. He mixed freely among them, ate the same rations they did, and if he suspected the quartermaster of cheating them, he stepped in. He electrified his men with epic speeches by comparing their victories to past glories on ancient battlefields. It was in Italy where the legend of Napoleon was born. There were so many powerful moments in this campaign, like the storming of the bridge at Lodi. On May 10th, 1796, as the Austrians retreated towards Milan, they left a rear guard at the town of Lodi, defending the far side of a long wooden bridge. Despite the danger, Napoleon ordered a full frontal assault and personally led the charge across the bridge. It was the last time he'd ever be allowed to risk himself so directly in combat. But from that day on, his troops affectionately called him the Little Corporal. Napoleon himself later recalled, "I no longer regarded myself as a simple general, but as a man called upon to decide the fate of peoples. It came to me then that I really could become a decisive actor on a national stage. At that point was born the first spark of high ambition." But in Ridley Scott's movie, we get none of that. Instead, we just cut to Napoleon marching victoriously into Milan, accepting artwork from the Catholic Church, and yeah, okay, he was very much into art and looted a lot from his conquest to put on display in Paris. But of all the things to show about his Italian campaign, that's it? We're 45 minutes in and still no closer to understanding what made Napoleon Napoleon. And it's clear the movie doesn't either. The fact that Napoleon greets the Milanese cardinals on horseback inside a cathedral is wildly out of character. He may not have been religious, but he understood the power of institutions, and Napoleon would never pull a stunt this provocative or disrespectful just to flex. But enough of that nonsense, we have ourselves some adultery to get through. After Milan, it cuts to Napoleon having dinner with guests. Then he glances and spots his new wife doing something he has never seen before. Smile. Oh yeah, and she's flirting with some young officer. In front of Napoleon and his guests. The ball's in that guy. Then we glance back to see Napoleon looking upset, I think. His vapid face hardly changes in the movie, it's hard to tell. Then it cuts to Napoleon and Josephine's uncomfortable and awkward sex scene. Now, I can't show you what it looks like, obviously, but just imagine Josephine staring off into space, disassociating, and it sounding something like this. Thankfully, when they're finished, Napoleon tries to drift off to sleep, but Josephine still has something to say.
I marry you and you leave. Every time you leave, I have no assurance of your return.
As if you even care! It's not like you were never invited, you refused to come! Okay, let me give you some context because you certainly aren't getting any in this movie. When Napoleon left for Italy on March 11, 1796, Josephine stayed behind in Paris, and in just a few weeks, she was already having an affair with Lieutenant Hippolyte Charles. Napoleon wrote letters to her constantly, gushing very melodramatically about his love for her, writing stuff like this.
Dear wife, this love I have for you is a kind of death.
This movie for me is a kind of death. Throughout the campaign, Napoleon wrote hundreds of letters, even during major battles, but she rarely replied, and the longer she kept silent, the more he longed over her. By May 1796, Napoleon was begging her to come join him in Italy, but by then, she was so wrapped up in her affair with Hippolyte, she had no intention of leaving Paris. At one point, she even faked a pregnancy just to keep stalling, misleading and overjoy Napoleon to write to her. Would it were possible that I might have the happiness of seeing you with your little belly. Soon you will give life to a being who will love you as much as me. By mid-June, Josephine stopped replying altogether, not even to checkups on her pregnancy. Finally getting suspicious, Napoleon demanded she join him, almost outright accusing her of infidelity. Completely out of lies to tell, Josephine left Paris in floods of tears and joined him in mid-July. But not before, get this, bringing her lover with her.
The audacity!
That's the reason why he's there and why we're seeing Napoleon awkwardly looking at Josephine. But in real life, she didn't flaunt her affair like this. When Josephine finally joined Napoleon in Italy, he was so overjoyed to be reunited that he was completely oblivious to Hippolyte Charles's presence. So, knowing all of that, it's a bit rich to hear Josephine complain. Speaking of leaving, now we're off to Egypt, at the Battle of the Pyramids, July 21st, 1798. And once again, we're not given a real reason why Napoleon's there, apart from this quick little throwaway line.
The Directories approved my plan for attacking England through their Eastern Empire.
By Eastern Empire, he means India, and while there was no Suez Canal yet, Egypt was part of the Ottoman Empire, a key transit route for British trade with India, and Napoleon hoped by taking Egypt, he could choke Britain's access to its most valuable colony. But anyway, facing Napoleon were the Mamluks, elite cavalry warriors. Let's see how Ridley Scott recreates this famous battle. Are you taking the piss? Out of all the things you could show Napoleon do, shooting the pyramids should be the very last. Napoleon was a massive history buff. He read ancient texts as a child, like bedtime stories. He never destroyed a monument to something he revered so much. At the real Battle of the Pyramids, Napoleon's army could see them 9 miles away. Unlike the movie where the battle takes place at their base, Napoleon pointed out these iconic structures and gave a rousing speech to his men. Could you imagine that same speech in this movie? Soldiers, you came to this country to save the inhabitants from barbarism, to bring civilization to the Orient and subtract this beautiful part of the world from the dominion of England. From the top of those pyramids, 40 centuries are contemplating you. Nah, fuck it, shoot the pyramids. And just like with Italy, we don't get to see any of the other cool stuff that happened in Egypt, like Napoleon's fleet sailing across the Med undetected, or Nelson sinking it at the Battle of the Nile, the Cairo Revolt, the French loss at Acre, not even this epic moment. When visiting plague-ridden soldiers outside Jaffa, Napoleon walked through a makeshift hospital, comforting the dying. According to one officer, he even picked up a plague victim with his own arms to calm the others and boost morale. It became a key part of his legend. But in the movie, all we get is this weird little scene. Are they making a Napoleon is short joke? Are they really scraping the bottom of that barrel? The myth that Napoleon was unusually short comes mostly from British propaganda and confusion over French versus English measurements. In reality, he was about 5'6", which was average back then. Still, the stereotype stuck and even gave us the term Napoleon complex to describe short men who overcompensate. And yet this movie just can't help itself but lean into a 200-year-old joke.
So, Bill, what you're telling me, essentially, is that Napoleon was a short, dead dude.
Well, yeah.
So moving on from there, the movie's back to yet another scene about Josephine. Oh good, it's been more than 5 minutes, I was starting to get worried. So we see Napoleon eating lunch with one of his most trusted generals, Jean Andoche Junot, who tells him the uncomfortable truth, that Josephine's cheating on him with Hippolyte Charles. At first Napoleon laughs in disbelief, then it gets angry and kicks him out before later questioning Junot further. Now this did happen. On July 19th, 1798, Junot told Napoleon about the affair, and apparently his cockholding was the talk of Paris. This conversation though took place before the Battle of the Pyramids, not after as it does in the movie, but that's not the biggest inaccuracy here.
How do you know this?
Lucille is my lover. She writes to me.
Josephine's lady-in-waiting is your lover. Prepare 2 frigates and 2 smaller vessels in the greatest secrecy. I'm returning home.
Are you bloody joking? They're seriously going to have Napoleon abandon his entire military campaign just because his wife cheated on him? This guy's remembered as one of the greatest conquerors in history. Would someone that petty, that emotionally fragile, really have the fortitude and resilience to conquer anything? You want to know what the real Napoleon did when he found out? Nothing. He had a water fight and didn't waste another second on her. He didn't leave Egypt for a whole other year. Now, it's true Napoleon did leave his men behind, but the reason why is because the political situation in Paris was dicey. The Directory, which controlled France, was a corrupt, bloated mess, and France was left vulnerable to its enemies. Napoleon was arguably France's best general at this point, and he felt he was needed back home, and so he left, arriving in France in October of 1799. By the time he got back, the War of the Second Coalition was in full swing against Britain, Russia, Austria, and the Ottoman Empire. There was virtually no money to run the army, robberies were rampant, the royalists were revolting again, the Royal Navy had blockaded the French, there was hyperinflation, France was on the verge of collapse. So the real Napoleon came back to fix things, but first he had to sort out his cheating wife, as everyone in France knew about the affair by then. In the movie, Napoleon returns home to an empty house. Josephine's away in Lyon, and only her lady-in-waiting, Lucille, is there to greet him. First he erupts in a tantrum, and then later he sulks over dinner and, get this, begs Lucille for pity sex.
My wife has humiliated me. And I need comfort, Lucille.
Yes, I'm sure that you do, General.
What do you suggest would give me comfort?
I can draw you a hot bath.
Beta! Wow! I have never seen a movie go out of its way to emasculate an historical figure like this. What's your beef, Ridley? Are you like descended from the Duke of Wellington or something? Shortly after being friend-zoned by the staff, Napoleon's wife Josephine returns home late, only to find all her belongings packed up and herself locked outside, which admittedly is mostly true. On October 18th, 1799, a full-on domestic row erupted between the couple.
What do you want me to say? I want you to say that I am the most important thing in the world.
You are.
Say it!
You're the most important thing in my life, in the world.
And without me, you are nothing.
I'm nothing.
And you will do anything!
I'll do anything.
Eventually the pair make up, as they did in real life, but Ridley Scott just can't help himself but insist Josephine have the final word.
I'm not built like other men. And I'm not subject to petty insecurity. You're a beast. I feel sorry for you.
You want to be great? You are nothing without me. Say it. Say it. You are just a brute that is nothing without me.
Guys, quick word of advice. If you ever screw up with your partner, never insult them after apologizing. They don't like it.
I'm just a brute that is nothing without you.
Yes. You are nothing without me or your mother.
He'd be nothing without you? What exactly have you contributed to this relationship, Josephine? You met him when he was already a rising star. Hell, even Paul Barras told you to go after him for his money. That's in the movie. Then you're not even married for 5 minutes before you're cheating and gambling away his earnings. I've also never seen you say one encouraging word or show an ounce of affection. Napoleon was the one writing all that lovey-dovey stuff.
My dear Josephine, away from you there is no joy. You must write me and tell me that you realize that I love you beyond the limits of imagination.
Now, as to Napoleon being nothing without his mother would normally make sense if he wasn't such a weirdo in this movie. Time and time again, he comes across like he has full-blown mummy issues. He's socially awkward.
Why are you staring at me?
He's weak.
My wife has humiliated me. And I need comfort, Lucille.
He's desperate for validation.
I want you to say that I am the most important thing in the world.
And cries at the mere mention of his mother. None of these traits make a great leader. If anything, this would suggest his mother turned him into an emotional wreck. So if he did accomplish anything, it wouldn't be because of her, it'd be despite her. But that's just Ridley Scott's Napoleon. The real guy? Saying he'd be nothing without his mother, you could actually make a strong case. According to Andrew Roberts in his book, Napoleon the Great, Napoleon ever spoke of his mother with love and admiration. He once told General Gourgaud, "My mother was a superb woman, a woman of ability and courage. Her tenderness was severe. Here was the head of a man on the body of a woman. She was a matriarch." If you look at the real Napoleon, his strength, discipline, independence, ambition, resilience, you could argue those traits came from having a strong maternal figure, raising him to be this way, teaching him those values. These are the qualities that build empires. But the problem for Ridley Scott is that this doesn't emasculate Napoleon, it grounds him. And it's clear in his movie, that's all he's interested in doing. When Napoleon returned to France, he wasn't just dealing with the fallout of Josephine's affair. He was also accused of deserting his army in Egypt, which, to be fair, he did, but, as he explains in the movie, the country he came back to was not the one he had left behind. The Directory had all but collapsed, and a few men, including Napoleon, see an opportunity in the Directory's failure.
The only thing that every French citizen can agree on is that you are our Caesar.
What do you want?
Well, the people will accept my rule if I have your support. Like you, that I believe that the Directory is corrupt. But together, we can save this country from a restoration of the monarchy. And we can preserve the ideals of the revolution.
Now, there's some truth to this scene. The coup was Sieyès' idea. Despite being one of the 5 directors himself, he approached Napoleon to be the muscle behind it. But when the coup happens in the movie, we see 2 days of events squished into one, so we're missing a lot of context. One of the complexities we miss is that Sieyès did not like Napoleon, and the feeling was mutual. It was Charles Maurice de Talleyrand, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who supported Napoleon's rise to power and convinced Sieyès to choose Napoleon for his coup. But we don't get that sense from the movie, and I'll say it now, Talleyrand in this film is largely forgettable. For someone so important to Napoleonic history, you'd think the movie would give him more attention. The same goes for Joseph Foch, Minister of Police. But in any case, here's what actually happened. On day 1 of the plot, November 9th, 1799, the conspirators spread a rumour about a Jacobin plot to overthrow the government. It's worth noting there were 3 governing bodies at this time. The Directory, who act as the executive branch, the Council of Ancients, or Elders, who are kind of like the Senate, and the Council of 500, who are similar to a House of Commons. Anyway, Napoleon gave his Protect the Republic speech to the Council of Ancients, vowing to protect them and take charge of the army in Paris to stop the fictional Jacobin rebellion. By midday, they and the Council of 500 were convinced to flee the capital and reconvene in Saint-Cloud. Once they were conveniently out of the city and under Napoleon's control, the next step was to dissolve the Directory.
Myself and Ducos will resign first, followed by Barras, Groyer, Moulon. And this will create an opening to transfer power.
On the morning of day 2, November 10th, 1799, the 3 remaining directors were confronted at breakfast and forced to resign. Paul Barras was the easiest to convince. With Sieyès and Ducos already signed on, and Napoleon now in charge of the troops, he admitted defeat and stepped down. As for the others, well, the movie shows them resist as pompously as possible.
It's a simple letter of resignation. We would like
I'm not signing anything! You can piss before I sign anything away!
Gentlemen.
We have a letter of resignation for you to sign.
No, no, no. I am eating my breakfast. I am enjoying a succulent breakfast.
Eating a meal? A succulent Chinese meal?
This is outrageous! I shall finish my breakfast before you catch me!
Enjoy your breakfast.
By mid-afternoon of November 10th, not the 9th like we see in the movie, Napoleon headed to Saint-Cloud and addressed each council separately that they needed to abolish the constitution and replace it with essentially a Roman-style triumvirate, a three-man executive government comprised of himself, Sieyès, and Ducos. Sieyès believed he could control the Council of Ancients. Meanwhile, Lucien, Napoleon's younger brother, was president of the Council of 500 and ready to dissolve it if necessary to see the plan through. Now in the movie we don't see Napoleon addressing the Council of Ancients, only of the 500. But as betrayed, it didn't go well.
This is becoming increasingly clear that your brother, Napoleon Bonaparte, with his show of military might, is acting as an outlaw. And that this is a ridiculous and poorly executed takeover. A power-hungry upstart.
Enough! Enough! If there is any question of what is happening here, I will answer. You stop! You have violated.
I mean, the council isn't wrong. And yes, they really did call him an outlaw. In real life, just like in the movie, Napoleon faced serious pushback when Lucien tried to convince the council to replace the Directory with a new government. What followed was chaos. The deputies swarmed Napoleon, heckling him, shoving him, even grabbing his collar. It got so bad he had to flee the building. But I'm not sure he did so in such a state as this. Why is he punching the door? What's that gonna do?
We are being terrorized by deputies armed with daggers. And these madmen have outlawed themselves for their attempt on the liberty of this country.
They're trying to kill me!
They're trying to kill him! I will kill my brother if he betrays the freedom of the French people! Get it out!
While Lucien did more or less say that to rally the guards, I doubt Napoleon was this terrified. I mean, just look at him. He's absolutely bricking it. Why? This man has won and lost major battles by this point. He watched his horse get killed by a cannonball, he's charged into enemy fire, he's planned this entire coup. So why does he look so incompetent and weak, especially next to his baby brother? Unless, of course, this is yet another attempt by Ridley Scott to dunk on Napoleon, because Joaquin Phoenix's performance here is just not historically accurate. Here's what historian Andrew Roberts had to say about that day. Did Napoleon lose his nerve on the 19th of Brumaire, as some have alleged, accusing him of cowardice and even of fainting and having to be carried out by his bodyguards? The manhandling must have been off-putting, but hardly much compared to being stabbed in the thigh by a pike or seeing one's aide-de-camp killed by a cannonball. Napoleon had been taken aback by the ferocity of the deputy's response, but claims of his losing his composure and handing everything over to Lucien are exaggerated. Despite the chaos, the coup ultimately works. But the movie skips over what happened next. Just one day later, Napoleon began plotting a second, quieter coup against his co-conspirators, Sieyès and Ducos. And within a month, he outmaneuvered everyone and became first consul of France. Very fitting for a man obsessed with ancient Rome. And now that he's in power, he knows it's time to either make peace with France's enemies or go to war. And it's also here that we are officially introduced to Talleyrand. See, they show his name and text and everything. So why now, not earlier when he was helping with the coup? Did the editors forget Talleyrand has already been in the movie? Maybe it's not just Napoleon and the audience falling asleep. As Minister of Foreign Affairs, Talleyrand meets with the Austrians and demands that they and their little coalition end their war with France.
Yes, it is true. It is public opinion Napoleon is after, but my warning to you is that he's as hungry for it as any man in the history of the world. So my suggestion, with respect, would be to take this little offering of peace from him, or suffer the consequences for a man bent on peace at any cost.
Now that is a good line. It's diplomatic, intimidating, and actually sounds like it came from someone with power. Shame it had to come from Talleyrand though, because when Napoleon tries to deliver the threats himself...
Take this as a warning to your king. I will keep you guessing and scared. You will watch your borders and your back, and your manners are bound sooner or later to be French. I will offer no more letters of peace, and I will take the lack of a swift reply as an act of disrespect. You think you're so great because you have boats!
It is a shame such a great man should have no manners.
Okay, in all seriousness, this confrontation did happen, and in fact inspired a pretty famous political cartoon by James Gilray. It took place at the Tuileries Palace on March 8, 1803, but Napoleon didn't come across like such a child as he does in the movie. Here's how the real confrontation went down, according to historian Andrew Roberts. Why the armaments? What are these precautionary measures aimed against? I don't have a single ship at the line in French ports. But if you're arming, I must also. If you want to fight, I will fight too. You might perhaps kill France, but you won't intimidate her. No one wishes to do either. We want to live on good terms. Then one must respect treaties. They will be responsible for this to all Europe. So seeing that he can't get his enemies to back down diplomatically, Napoleon knows he has to ride to war. Austria has been pushing into his conquered territory in Italy, so he'll confront them there. And this of course leads to the famous Battle of Marengo, another major turning point in Napoleon's career, where he marched his army over the Alps, something nobody had done since Charlemagne and before him, Hannibal. His victory eventually led to driving the Austrians out of northern Italy, securing Napoleon's grip on power back in France. So, let's see how they recreate it. Well, it starts off with Napoleon and his generals huddled around a giant map of Europe planning their campaign.
The Austrians have consolidated their forces here, First Consul, to secure control of the peninsula's northern half.
South of Alessandria, in Marengo.
How the fuck do you know where the Austrians are going to be? Weeks in advance, no less. The idea that Napoleon and his generals could predict the Battle of Marengo is absurd. This movie has no clue how mobile these battles were. They weren't football matches with scheduled kickoffs. They were fluid, reactive, and shaped by scouting, terrain, the weather, misinformation, and last-minute maneuvering. Napoleon may have had general objectives, but pinpointing Marengo as the site of the battle before even crossing the Alps is bollocks. But hey, that's only the lead-up. Let's see how the actual battle is portrayed. Let's see, a jump cuts to Napoleon charging into battle on horseback, which he never did, and the title card tells it's June 14th, 1800, so at least they got the date right. The whole battle is reduced to a 26-second scene of the French riding on the Austrians, and oh yeah, Napoleon chopping some poor sod's head off in slow motion. Wow, how fucking inspired. I mean, I guess I shouldn't expect much, right? We got nothing for the first Italian campaign, nothing for Egypt, and this is all Marengo gets? It's just so infuriating that the movie prioritizes Napoleon and Josephine's relationship over anything else. And it can't even get that right.
My hair has been set. The way you like it. Oh, you filthy man, my hair has been set.
I'm sorry, who is this scene for? It's clearly not for history buffs, because we're watching this instead of some major battle.
No. All right, come on then.
So I'll ask again, who's the scene for, movie? Who? So after some more pasta slapping, we cut to the next scene, which is all about the Infernal Machine plot. On Christmas Eve in Paris, 1800, a carriage was rigged to blow up when Napoleon passed by en route to the opera, but there's a few problems with this scene. First, the movie shows a fiery carriage exploding right as Napoleon and Josephine ride past together. In reality, they were in different carriages, and Josephine also had her daughter Hortense with her. Napoleon's carriage was well ahead of the danger, and Josephine's carriage was behind, so the explosion was more or less in between them. And no, the carriage wasn't already on fire. It was packed with gunpowder barrels and rigged with a fuse that was lit moments before Napoleon passed. In the aftermath of the opera bombing, the film shows Napoleon ordering the arrest of a Bourbon duke named the Duc d'Enghien. Since royalists were behind the assassination attempt, Napoleon decides to prevent future plots by having the Bourbon prince snatched from a neutral German state called Baden. Like we see in the movie, Napoleon's advisors were stunned by his decision and strongly objected against it.
First Consul, I know this man. He is not a conspirator against you. He is a brave and excellent officer, much loved by the soldiery.
He's a filthy Bourbon weasel who will be punished for his part in this plot against me.
If you proceed to Baden, you will be operating outside of France, and so far outside the law that it will be impossible for anyone to ignore.
I see. Well, I have always profited from your judgment. And now it's time to profit from watching you close your mouth Seize the Duke.
What made this decision so shocking wasn't just that Napoleon ordered a Bourbon prince kidnapped from foreign soil, it's that the Duke would later be denied a trial and executed in secret. Even members of Napoleon's inner circle were horrified when they found out. When she learned the truth, Josephine begged Napoleon to spare the Duke. But the filmmakers likely felt that showing a woman plead with her husband was too demeaning, so instead they just have her quietly judge him.
You're letting your hatred make your decision.
In a year's time, you will regard this execution as an act of great policy, and you will kiss my mouth with those words.
In the movie, we don't see Duc d'Enghien being seized in Bardennes or brought back to France. We just cut straight to his execution by firing squad. Yet, like most things in this picture, the timing of his death is wrong. The thing is, the Duc d'Enghien wasn't killed in 1800 because of the Infernal Machine plot. He was killed later, in 1804, because of an apparent connection to the Cadoudal affair, a completely different assassination attempt when Napoleon was on the way to his estate, the Malmaison, in 1803. But instead of focusing on getting these interesting political events right, the very next scene brings us right back to the awkward relationship between Napoleon and Josephine.
Why aren't you pregnant?
Is that a question or is that an accusation?
It was a question. Now it's an accusation.
She then goes on to explain her doctor prescribed a fertility treatment, and Napoleon insists she find the time.
What, you want an heir?
I want one now.
Oh god, not again. You see, this should be a pivotal moment. Napoleon wanting an heir is what eventually tears their marriage apart and reshapes European history. But instead of treating it with any weight, the film has him snorting under the table like a truffle pig. What are we even doing? We're only halfway through the movie, and you know it's only going to get worse. On December 2nd, 1804, Napoleon was crowned Emperor of the French. In terms of the movie's narrative, the only real hint we get at this being a natural step in his quest for power was an out-of-place scene with Talleyrand earlier suggesting he become king. Otherwise, there's no context to understand how he got here. And while it's true Napoleon grabbed the crown from the Pope and crowned himself emperor, it wasn't the big dramatic surprise the movie makes it out to be. In reality, it was planned and rehearsed with the Pope's knowledge and reluctant acceptance. Wait a second, is that Hippolyte Charles? What the hell's he doing here? Movie, do you expect me to believe that Napoleon Bonaparte would invite his wife's former lover to his own coronation? Front row seats, no less! Out of all the things you've shown him do, this is the most ridiculous.
Don't be shy, Captain. Tell me, if I want to have a son, do you think I should spend time with my mouth down between my wife's legs?
I hate this fucking movie. Just when he thought this soggy biscuit couldn't get any more pathetic, now we see Napoleon ask Hippolyte Charles for tips on how to bang his wife.
What? When you made your wife pregnant, did you spend much time?
Why? Do you want to pull up a chair and watch?
Are you sure about this?
All jokes aside, no, Napoleon never invited Hippolyte Charles to his coronation or asked him for sexual advice. Come on now. But the real Napoleon was concerned about having an heir. We see him later in the movie badgering Josephine about it and embarrassing her in front of guests.
Are you enjoying yourself? I'm going to war to defend our people, and my wife cannot provide me an heir. If you do not bear me a child tonight, there will be a divorce.
Hasn't been enough love-making in this home to bear a child.
Yes, there has. And still, you are empty.
You're fat.
I enjoy my meals. I do.
Destiny has brought me here. Destiny has brought me this lamb chop.
Despite what we see in the movie, there's no evidence Napoleon ever humiliated Josephine in front of guests, especially in such a disrespectful way as to call her Baron. Their arguments about an heir were private, and in public, he went out of his way to show her respect, especially given her title as Empress. In any case, it's not long after their public spat that we're suddenly in Austerlitz. No build-up, no context, just, hey guys, look, it's Austerlitz, see? It's a Napoleon movie! The closest thing we get to an explanation is this throwaway line.
I'm going to war to defend our people.
Why? Against who? What for? What are the stakes? Maybe this movie didn't waste so much time faffing about with pointless scenes about Josephine, we might actually give a shit. So let me summarize the Battle of Austerlitz, and then we'll look at how the movie does it. By 1805, things were getting tense between France and its old enemies, especially Great Britain. In fact, Napoleon spent much of 1803 planning an invasion across the Channel that would never happen. Meanwhile, the British encouraged Russia and Austria to declare war on France, forming what became the Third Coalition. Now, one of Napoleon's greatest military innovations was the corps system. Instead of one massive army that moved together, he divided his forces into smaller, faster, self-sufficient units that could operate independently. That way, they could move quickly, confuse the enemy, and then regroup into a massive force when needed. Today, that sounds obvious, but back then, it was revolutionary, and a key reason why Napoleon wiped the floor with so many of his enemies. At Austerlitz, Napoleon faced a larger combined Austro-Russian army holding the high ground at the Pratzen Plateau, but he wanted that. He deliberately made it seem like the French were weak and stretched thin, encouraging his enemies to attack. Just before the battle, Napoleon scouted the terrain himself. He picked the ground, studied the maps, and built his trap. On the morning of December 2nd, 1805, the battlefield was blanketed in fog, and this factored into his plans as well. He sent around 50,000 of his troops out to bait the Allies into overcommitting. Meanwhile, he held his best troops in reserve, hidden in the mist. The Austrians and Russians attacked, and Napoleon ordered his men to retreat, giving up their position at the bottom of the Pratzen Plateau. The enemy took the bait and pursued the French troops, exposing the Austrians and Russians to a French counterattack and leaving the Pratzen Plateau virtually unguarded. But that just exposed their center, and right on cue, Napoleon's hidden corps smashed through it. He took the high ground, crushed the enemy from both sides, and turned the battle into a slaughter. Austerlitz wasn't just a victory, it was one of the most brilliantly executed battles in military history. So let's see how Ridley Scott cocks it up. Okay, first of all, it wasn't snowing at Austerlitz. One of the key reasons Napoleon won was because of the thick fog. It may have been December, but it wasn't snowing. Then we get Napoleon narrating one of his endless letters to Josephine, something the movie constantly leans on to dump exposition.
My previous ally has now joined with my enemy. The Russian Tsar Alexander joined forces with the Prince of Austria. I have heard that he's been studying the art of war and trying to emulate my battle tactics.
What are you talking about? Tsar Alexander was never Napoleon's ally before Austerlitz. Their alliance only came later at Tilsit in 1807, so in the context of the movie, his line makes no sense. And as for Alexander copying his battle tactics? What battle tactics? All we've seen for the past hour and 40 minutes is Napoleon either ordering charge or fire. Any time we could have spent exploring his tactics, Ridley Scott wasted on something completely irrelevant. Like Napoleon taking a shit. Honestly, why do we need scenes like this? Is this meant to be foreshadowing his future hemorrhoids? He doesn't start suffering from them until Waterloo, 10 years from now. I swear this movie will take any cheap opportunity it can to humiliate the man.
Harder. Like a horse.
And if that wasn't degrading enough, the movie now sets out to completely butcher the greatest battle of Napoleon's career. Perched on a hill, he watches as an Austro-Russian army advance across the valley towards a French camp fortified at the base.
Wait! Let them think they have the higher ground.
What higher ground? You're literally on a hill looking down at the enemy. You're the ones with the higher ground, you twat. Fortunately for Napoleon, his enemy are just as equally clueless. Despite outnumbering the French, the Austro-Russian army decides the best use of their cavalry is to charge directly across open ground into a fortified French position. And then, as if one suicide charge wasn't enough, their infantry follow in exactly the same way. No artillery support, no formations, no coordination, just a swarm of men charging straight into musket fire.
Send in the infantry! Take their position on the higher ground! At the double!
And yes, you heard that right. Napoleon just ordered his men to take the higher ground by charging down fucking hill, and from there, the battle devolves into a giant mosh pit. Everyone's packed into the same valley like sardines, fighting hand to hand. Which is why it makes perfect sense when Napoleon then says this.
Cavalry from the west! Pierce their flanks!
Flanks? What flanks? What flanks are they supposed to pierce? It's just a giant swirling brawl. How do you expect cavalry to charge the enemy without trampling their own side? This strategy of everyone bum rushing the same spot makes absolutely no sense. And yet somehow, this is what turns the tide of battle.
Retreat! Withdraw!
Not exactly sure how joining the back of the queue makes a difference, but the Austro-Russians panic and retreat across a frozen lake. We then see the French uncover and fire some cannons, cracking the surface and causing their fleeing enemies to drown. Now, while it's true that Napoleon did pursue Russian forces across frozen lakes and even ordered his men to fire on the ice, it wasn't on such a scale as this. But for once, it's not just Ridley Scott blowing things out of proportion, Napoleon did too. According to historian Andrew Roberts, this incident led to the myth that thousands of Russians drowned as the ice cracked, though recent excavations of the reclaimed land at Lake Satchan turned up only a dozen corpses and a couple of guns. The water also wasn't nearly as deep as the movie makes it seem. The real Napoleon, true to form, inflated the scale of the lake deaths for propaganda, and this film just runs with that myth. So in the next scene, we see Napoleon meet with the Austrian Emperor Francis in his tent to negotiate a peace settlement. In reality, they met 2 days after the battle on December 4th, 1805, at the foot of a windmill, about 10 miles from Austerlitz, but whatever. Of all the inaccuracies in this movie, this one's probably the least offensive. And to be fair, the actual conversation between the two emperors is more or less the same. Emperor Francis was desperate to wrap up peace talks immediately, and Napoleon was absolutely loving it. What the film doesn't show are the brutal peace terms they agreed upon. Officially ratified weeks later at the Treaty of Pressburg, Austria was forced to surrender a fifth of its territory, 2.5 million subjects, pay 40 million francs in reparations, and to pledge eternal peace and friendship with Napoleon, thus ending the War of the Third Coalition. Anyway, after wrapping things up with the Austrians, we cut back to France. And now we're treated to one of the weirdest scenes in the entire movie. Napoleon sits slumped in a chair like a sulking child, while his mother Letizia scolds him about Josephine's infertility. And then she proposes an experiment.
At the end of the hallway, take this. Waiting for you, undressed, ready to receive, is 18-year-old Eleanor Denuel de la Plenia. She's brunette with brown eyes, and the object of this, well, hardly unpleasant task is to see if you can father a child.
Ew! What is wrong with these people? Your eyes don't deceive you guys. Napoleon's mummy has literally sent her son shuffling down the corridor to knock up some random girl she selected for him, like a broodmare. This is disturbing stuff. I mean, look at that girl's face. She's terrified. So I bet you're asking, did this actually happen? Of course not. Now, while the real Napoleon did sleep with and impregnate a woman named Eleanor, his mother had nothing to do with it. He met Eleanor in 1805 when she was serving as a lady-in-waiting to his sister, Caroline, and she eventually became one of his lovers. So once again, we're faced with another weird choice. Why not instead have Napoleon, I don't know, catch her eye somewhere, think she's cute, charm her a little, and then sleep with her? Because that would make him normal. And this movie refuses to show Napoleon as anything other than a creep. He can't even get laid without it being awkward and weird. The fact that the real Napoleon had dozens of lovers throughout his life is an inconvenient truth to Ridley Scott's agenda. But anyway, in the next scene, Letizia tells her son that Eleanor is pregnant. But strangely, it looks like the same party. There's no clear time jump, so it just feels like Napoleon knocked her up between dance numbers.
When are you going to insist we divorce?
Oh, isn't that wonderful? From the only woman that I've ever loved and given all that I've conquered.
I'm just too tired to wait for you to tell me what I know is coming.
If you insist.
I'll make it easy for you. I know you'll have a bastard child.
Ugh, there's still more than an hour left. I'm so done with their toxic relationship. But apparently they are too, because shortly after this, they finally get divorced. You'd naturally think with Josephine out of the picture, we don't have to waste any more scenes with her, but you'd be wrong. On December 15th, 1809, the divorce ceremony between Napoleon and Josephine took place at the Tuileries Palace in Paris. Like we see in the movie, it was a grand but solemn occasion, held in front of the entire imperial court. The reason, of course, was simple. As emperor, Napoleon needed an heir, and Josephine couldn't provide him one.
Our marriage has become an obstacle for the prosperity of France. She has been deprived of one day being governed by the descendants of a man brought to us by Providence to mend the evils of a terrible revolution and restore faith, the throne, and the social order.
Go. This is for your country. That's what this is, right? Say it. Say it.
That slap, by the way, wasn't in the script. Look at Hortense's face there. According to an interview with Empire magazine, both Joaquin Phoenix and Vanessa Kirby agreed to, quote, go to dark and unexpected places to find spontaneity and life in historic material. The slap was consensual between the actors in a way. Vanessa Kirby noted that it's the greatest thing when you have a creative partner and you say, right, everything's safe, I'm with you, and we're going to go to the dark places together. But for me, the slap feels out of place. Not because it's shocking, but because it comes out of nowhere. I mean, that's been the most emotion we've seen from either of them the whole movie. You'd think by how he's behaved up until now, she'd be over the moon about this, but now we're supposed to believe she cares. Why? Based on their lack of chemistry, I couldn't tell you if she was more upset about losing her meal ticket or just nursing her bruised ego. In any case, with the two of them now divorced, Napoleon still continues to visit her at Malmaison, and they still write letters to each other. Now, this is true of the real Napoleon and Josephine as well, as they both kept in touch well after their divorce. Unfortunately, that just means we're stuck with even more boring scenes between the pair. Even though she doesn't need to be in the movie anymore, the film still finds excuses to bring her back. So shortly after that, Napoleon goes on to meet with the Russian Tsar Alexander to sign the Treaty of Tilsit in July 1807. Wait, what? Hold on a second, 1807? Napoleon and Josephine got divorced in 1809. He even said as much 2 scenes ago.
You have embellished my life for 15 years.
If you take 1809 and subtract 15 years, that would give you 1794 as the year they met, as is even credited in the movie. Did anyone even watch this before approving the final cut? In any case, the Tilsit scene is wrong too. We see Napoleon and Alexander talking under this tent with French and Russian soldiers guarding the outside. But the text on screen tells us that it's July 1807, which is when the Treaty of Tilsit was signed. What we're watching on screen is the initial meeting between Napoleon and Alexander from days before, where they talk about their mutual hatred of the British and a potential marriage alliance between Napoleon and Alexander's sister, Anna.
Well, you see, Anna, she's 15 years old.
That is a detail.
Gross. In real life, this meeting took place over several days in late June 1807 on a raft in the middle of the Niemen River, and this is most certainly not a raft. In the end, Napoleon didn't go for Alexander's much younger sister, but instead went for the 18-year-old Archduchess Marie-Louise of Austria. Politically, it was to keep Austria in his pocket. He didn't think they'd declare war on him if he married into the Habsburg royal family, which was very naive. The movie speed runs through this whole process, of course. In one moment, Napoleon meets his new wife when she arrives at what I assume is the Tuileries Palace.
You're quite petite. I'm not accustomed to that. Would you like to see the bedroom?
Still gross. And then literally in the next scene, Napoleon's given his only legitimate son, Napoleon Francois Joseph Charles Bonaparte, and we never see that girl again. Now, I'm not usually annoyed with fast time jumps in historical movies. Sometimes you have to condense a lot of history. The problem here, though, is that the movie spent so much time on boring, awkward scenes with Josephine and not on the major events that actually shaped Napoleon's life. So now when the film suddenly rushes through the important stuff, it feels jarring. Napoleon married Marie-Louise by proxy on March 11, 1810. This was common between royal families. Marie-Louise's great aunt, Marie Antoinette, did the same thing with her French husband, Louis XVI. The first time they met was supposed to be a few miles from Soissons in a tent, but Napoleon got so impatient to see her that he intercepted her carriage on the way and just jumped right in there. But back to the movie. Now that Napoleon has a son and legitimate heir, he feels more secure as Emperor of France. And the first thing he does is to take his son to show Josephine. Can you imagine how she must have felt? Oh, sorry, you couldn't get pregnant and I had to divorce you, but look, my son with my new wife. We're so happy together. In all seriousness, this did happen, but not the way we see it on screen. Marie-Louise was pretty jealous of Josephine, so Napoleon had to arrange a secret meeting to make it happen. And that meeting took place 2 years later at the Château de Bagatelle, not the Malmaison, and certainly not right after baby Napoleon was born.
One day, you will understand what I have sacrificed for you.
I doubt he'll care. But while things at home are looking up for Napoleon, they're not looking so great with his newest ally. And very soon, Tsar Alexander's actions will compel Napoleon to make the gravest mistake of his career, to invade Russia. Surprisingly for once, the movie does try to give a setup for Napoleon's latest war, even if it is very briefly. It started when Napoleon and Alexander formed their alliance and both agreed to choke out Britain economically.
Our friendship is built on our mutual distrust of England. When we hold to the continental blockade, we choke them from the trade and we fight for our most sacred rights.
But just a few scenes later, Alexander's advisors tell the young Tsar why his alliance is doomed to fail.
Плохо для России. А если это плохо для России, это не может быть хорошо для Ваше Величество. Продажа алиеса в Британию, вот что сделает Россию великой.
With economic pressure mounting in Russia, Alexander secretly begins trade again with Britain, provoking Napoleon to open war.
My dear Josephine, I'm sad today. Tsar Alexander has turned against me and forced me to invade Russia. He's decided to open his ports to England while taxing the French.
And that's all we get. Now the thing is, I know what the continental system is, but for your average viewer, these cliff notes mean nothing. What the movie doesn't mention is that the continental system was a massive trade blockade designed to stop British goods from reaching mainland Europe. Every country under Napoleon's influence was banned from trading with Britain, including Russia. And since Napoleon couldn't beat the British Royal Navy, he tried to cripple their economy instead. It was a key motivation behind multiple wars and shaped nearly every major political decision during his reign. The problem is Britain wasn't hit as hard as Napoleon hoped. They just shifted their trade to other parts of the world, like the Americas and their colonies. Meanwhile, countries like Russia suffered badly. Timber and grain exports to Britain were vital to their economy, and when the blockade cut that off, Russia took a serious hit, eventually pushing them to reopen trade and break the alliance. This left Napoleon with two choices: accept the loss and risk looking weak to every other nation following the continental system, or go to war with Russia. He chose war. On June 24, 1812, Napoleon launched the largest invasion in history up to that point, an army of over 600,000 men, only half of whom were French.
I've convinced the heads of Europe of this resolution, and so I command the combined forces of France, Austria, Italy, Germany, and Poland.
As soon as the invasion starts, we see Napoleon's grand army being raided by Cossack guerrillas. They launch a few mortars and retreat into the forest, luring French lancers to chase after them, only to be cut down in an ambush. Later, the bodies of the lancers are discovered publicly displayed and mutilated. Now, the success of violence against the French invaders did happen, but not until much later in the campaign. Here's what historian Andrew Roberts had to say. Rumours about what the peasantry and Cossacks were doing to captured Frenchmen easily equaled those of what the Turks, Calabrians and Spanish had done, and including skinning them alive. Peasants would buy prisoners off the Cossacks at 2 rubles a head. The luckiest were merely stripped of their clothing and left naked in the snow, but torture was commonplace. Another thing wrong with this scene is the geography and weather. This is supposed to be Russia in late June, but with its heath-like woodland and dull overcast skies, this looks far more like southern England in late autumn or early winter. And I bet you this is the same filming location they used for Austerlitz. Ridley Scott likes to use the Bourne Woods in Surrey in particular for his filming locations, as he did in Gladiator, Kingdom of Heaven and Robin Hood. But all of those movies take place in Western Europe, which is fine for them, but completely inappropriate for Russia in the height of summer. In reality, the invasion began with heavy summer storms that turned the roads into thick mud and left the ground waterlogged. But once the rain cleared, the heat returned with a vengeance, kicking up so much dust that drummers had to march to the front of the columns just so the men behind wouldn't get lost, none of which we see in the movie. Instead, we jump forward to the Battle of Borodino in September 1812 to see yet another boring slow-motion cavalry charge led by Napoleon straight into Russian guns and cannon, which looks just like the equally boring cavalry charge at the Battle of Marengo. Only difference was at Marengo they were charging from left to right, and here they're charging from right to left. The real Battle of Borodino was the single bloodiest day of battle in the history of warfare up until that point, only toppled by the First Battle of the Marne in September 1914. With only 65 miles left until Moscow, the Russians had fortified the battlefield with massive redoubts and defensive earthworks known as flèches. This wasn't some mindless cavalry charge, it was a brutal artillery slugfest. The French alone fired around 60,000 cannonballs that day, and entire divisions were chewed up in the fighting, with flèches captured and recaptured in wave after wave of bloody attritional combat. There were an estimated 6,600 French soldiers killed and 21,400 wounded. The Russians fared even worse, with 43,000 casualties and driven off the battlefield. Though the French losses were staggering, Napoleon had opened the road to Moscow. It wasn't a decisive victory, but it was a victory nonetheless, and so he pushed on to the Russian capital. And just like we see in the film, when he arrived on September 14th, 1812, it was deserted.
300,000 souls live in the city. And they've all just left?
Tsar Alexander employed a scorched earth policy in the wake of his retreats, burning or destroying everything as his army retreated. Food, horses, supplies, ammo, all gone. By the time Napoleon reached Moscow, his troops were already starving, and his supply lines were in ruins. Things weren't looking good. Anyway, Napoleon marches right into the empty Kremlin and starts getting weird again.
Little boy. Where are you? Don't be frightened. Just gonna give you a little spanking.
He knows Alexander isn't there, the place is empty, so who's he saying this for? His soldiers? Then he plops himself down on the bird-shit-covered throne and strikes a pose straight out of the famous painting Napoleon at the Fontainebleau, 1814. You know the one, look, same vibe. And then he goes to sleep. When he wakes up, Moscow is burning. Russian saboteurs had been hiding in the city and waited for the right moment to strike.
He'd rather burn his own city than negotiate with me. I didn't think he had the courage. Well, we'll go to St. Petersburg and have him burn that too.
We have let too much time slip away. We would be marching into the Russian winter with horses that are not raised for this weather. If we go back to Poland, we can wait out the winter months.
I know what you're thinking, but for once, this part is absolutely true. The Russians really did burn their own capital, rather than let Napoleon have it. With winter fast approaching, Napoleon eventually relented to his marshal's advice and ordered the retreat 5 weeks later, and his hesitation cost him. The first heavy snowfall hit on November the 4th, 1812, and as we see in the movie, the effects in the army were devastating. Landmarks vanished under snow, roads turned to ice, and snow blindness struck the men. Fingers, noses, toes, and ears. Many were lost to frostbite. Thousands of horses died within days. Those who could fed on their flesh. And in some cases, the desperate even resorted to the unthinkable.
Those are Cossacks.
Us.
Towards the end, the Grand Army's morale collapsed. Soldiers disobeyed officers, and officers ignored generals. Every man was united only by survival. As the remnants of the army limped back towards Poland and safety, Napoleon turned his thoughts to the political fallout of his disastrous campaign, writing in one of his many letters to Josephine.
I know I will return home to the judgment of these European kings, and they will not judge me as they judge themselves. They will punish me by a standard they would never apply to each other. I wish you could put me on your knee and take care of me.
What? Really, movie? Can you not go 5 minutes without infantilizing the man? Apparently not. Anyway, with the way things are going, Napoleon ends up abandoning his troops to get back to Paris. In the movie, it's Caulaincourt telling him to go, but in reality, Napoleon made that decision himself, just as he had in Egypt in 1799, and for the same reason. The political situation in France was bad, and only getting worse with the news of the 524,000 men he had just lost, the greatest disaster of his career.
My presence back home will be proof to my people. They have no one to fear in the world.
They fear you, Majesty. They fear no one but you.
Unlike in the movie, the real Napoleon didn't just crawl home and give up after Russia. He immediately started raising new troops, knowing that the combined armies of Russia, Austria, Prussia, Sweden, Great Britain, and pretty much every other former ally would be coming for him. The War of the Sixth Coalition was brutal. Napoleon fought a string of bloody battles across 1813 and 1814, and for the first time in years, his weaknesses were fully exposed. His beloved corps system was no longer unique. His enemies had learned his tricks, and his armies were now full of young conscripts instead of seasoned veterans. And no matter how many battles he won, Napoleon couldn't muster enough men to win them all. And he couldn't be everywhere at once. The movie skips all of this, of course, and jumps straight from Russia to his abdication and first exile. As Talleyrand tells him,
"Of the 600,000 men you sent to Russia, only 40,000 have returned.
It was closer to 100,000, but okay.
Therefore, you have been exiled. In no uncertain terms. The Allied coalition of Austria, Prussia, Russia, and England, and with the agreement of the French Council, grant you sovereignty of the island of Elba."
Napoleon signs his letter of abdication and on May 3rd, 1814, lands on the Mediterranean island of Elba, though of course a lot is skipped for pacing, like how his new wife Marie-Louise had an affair with the Austrian general Count Adam von Neipperg and left with their son to stay in Austria. Napoleon never saw either of them again. Or how Napoleon, while at the Fontainebleau in April 1814, attempted suicide by poison. But back to the movie. Now that Napoleon's in Elba, we just see him moping about the place.
It brings me no great joy to sit with my son and have him gloomy and sullen.
You clearly haven't been watching the movie. This is how he's been the whole time. But we know his story doesn't end there. When the real Napoleon abdicated, the great powers restored the French monarchy under Louis XVI's brother, Louis XVIII, and it should be no surprise that the people ended up hating them, like almost immediately. the Bourbons made a series of horrible decisions, like tanking the economy, reversing revolutionary reforms, and swapping the Republican tricolour for the Bourbon fleur-de-lis. So when Napoleon heard that the people still loved him and wanted him back, he formulated a plan to return, reclaim power, and, at least in his mind, save France. But the movie fucks this all up by having us believe Napoleon only left Elba just to be reunited with Josephine.
Dear Josephine, you are mine. You will always be. I cannot stand it any longer. It has been 300 days on this rock, and I am ready to come home and reclaim what's mine. You and France.
Tiny little problem with that. Josephine died while Napoleon was in exile on Elba. She died on May 29, 1814, and Napoleon didn't leave Elba until almost 9 months later, on February 26, 1815. But in the movie, she's still alive, and apparently, the big reason Napoleon risks his life is down to a tabloid newspaper about Josephine being seen with Tsar Alexander.
My wife is entertaining the Russian Emperor in my home.
Sorry, man.
I'm gonna tickle you again.
Wouldn't let that shit happen to me, though.
Oh, and a conveniently dramatic letter where Josephine hints she might be dying.
Napoleon, I am a flower that opens its petals and smiles to the sunshine, unconscious that the storm is near, which will lay me low and scatter leaves to the heavens. Come quickly, my friend.
What the movie doesn't realise is that this has opened up a huge plot hole. If Josephine really missed Napoleon in the whole 9 months before she got sick, then why didn't she ever visit? He wasn't banned from having guests. His mum came, his family came. Why not Her Royal Bleeding Highness? But our protagonist never asks such questions, and so Napoleon triumphantly returns with 1,000 of his old guard. There's a scene in here where we see the king, Louis XVIII, learn that Napoleon has returned, but once again, there's no context for this. At no point has the audience been told that Louis XVIII returned from exile to reclaim the throne. He's just there now. If you didn't already know that he was brought back, then you'd be super confused who this guy is. And there's no explanation given for why the people want Napoleon back and why the king isn't good for them, but screw it. Napoleon needs to be reunited with his ex-wife, and there's no time for the truth. Napoleon also manages to get past troops meant to stop him. Not only that, but they join him, which did happen, as he was, and still is, popular with his soldiers. But by the time Napoleon arrives at Malmaison, it is already too late. Josephine has died from illness, and her grieving daughter, Hortense, breaks the news.
On May 29th, last sacrament was given and she died.
Wait a minute, that timeline doesn't make sense. When Napoleon arrives in Elba in the movie, the titles clearly say May 1814. Then we see Napoleon reading that newspaper, Josephine write him a letter telling him to come, Napoleon fleeing Elba, landing in France, raising an army, and arriving in Malmaison to discover Josephine has died on May 29th? You mean to tell me all this shit happened in a month? And yes, in a month, because the next scene after this is the Congress of Vienna, which clearly states March 1815. I can't take much more of this, guys. I really can't. And we still have 38 minutes to go! So while Napoleon reclaims the throne off camera, the major Allied powers meet at the Congress of Vienna to figure out what to do about it. And the fact that in this movie, they have apparently done nothing for 10 months is hilarious. What were they doing this whole time? Scratching their ass? In real life, the Congress of Vienna had been going on for almost a year. Its whole purpose was to restore peace and stability to Europe after the Napoleonic Wars. But when Napoleon suddenly returned to power in March 1815, they had to drop everything and form the Seventh Coalition, mobilizing their armies against him one last time.
This congregation of allies shall form along the borders of France and Belgium an army. 70,000 troops from England, 120,000 troops from Prussia. This vermin has routed the farmyards of Europe. He has held the world hostage with his egotism, his insatiable hunger for power, and his lack of simple good manners.
So that man right there is Sir Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, one of Britain's greatest generals, famous for fighting the French in Portugal and Spain. But since the movie showed none of that to anyone who doesn't know their history, this just feels like some random new guy showing up at the 11th hour, which is bad storytelling. But in any case, Wellington's remembered as Napoleon's greatest rival. Speaking of whom, we then see the French Emperor making big plans with his big map.
Strike quickly against Wellington and Blucher. Defeat them separately. Disallow them from uniting forces here.
Again, how do you know you'll face them in Waterloo before you've even invaded Belgium? With foresight like that, I'm surprised you don't know how this battle's gonna go.
I don't think it's gonna work. No? Triomphe Napoleon.
So we then cut to Waterloo, and the title card at least gets the date right, June 18th, 1815, which I suppose we should be grateful for. What I'm not grateful for is yet another shot of Napoleon taking a shit. This is the third time, by the way, they bring up his piles. Once at Austerlitz, then again in Russia, and now here, complete with a lovely close-up of a bloody toilet. Thanks for that. Now yes, it's true Napoleon may have suffered from piles during the Battle of Waterloo. There's no evidence of him having it at Austerlitz, Borodino, or anywhere else. So back to the movie, it's early morning and pouring with rain, which is true. Napoleon had to delay his attack until the ground dried. A dangerous predicament since the Prussian army was on its way to relieve the British. All Wellington had to do was hold out until they arrived. But what's not true is this shot. What the hell are the British doing in trenches? The British army at Waterloo didn't dig any. First of all, they didn't have time to. They only arrived last night and it's been raining non-stop. Secondly, they didn't need to. Wellington used natural ridges and reverse slopes to shield his army from French artillery. This isn't World War I, Ridley. Can you stop bouncing around different time periods?
I have the Emperor in my sights. Do I have permission to fire?
What the fuck is that? Is that meant to be a sniper rifle? It can't be anything else. Baker rifles, the ones Green Jackets actually used, only had a range of 300 yards. And slapping a telescope on one doesn't magically make it more accurate.
I have the Emperor in my sights. Do I have permission to fire?
Certainly not, Private Sniper. Now put away your revolutionary weapon. You too, Private Minigun. Anyway, after Napoleon gets word that the Prussians under Blucher are getting closer to the battlefield, he readies the cannons. They fire on the British and the battle begins. Then the French infantry advance from some trenches? Wait, the French have trenches too. That makes even less sense. The whole point of trenches is to defend your position and hold it. The French weren't interested in staying put. They were the attackers. So why would they waste time digging them? And look at this, the French deploying in perfect British-style lines. Ridley, are you aware the French advanced in columns? Because they're kind of Napoleon's trademark. Fast, aggressive formations, designed to smash through enemy lines with shock and momentum. The British, on the other hand, were the ones who preferred fighting in lines because it maximized firepower. You not bothering to show the difference just proves once again how little you give a shit. And while we're at it, why are the British wasting ammo firing now? Smoothbore muskets are only effective between 50 and 100 yards, and the French are way beyond that. When they eventually do come into range, we see their advance falter against the onslaught of British firepower. Then a rider rushes to Napoleon with urgent news.
Prussians! Roadside! 5 miles!
5 miles, maybe less. We have to act before Blucher arrives.
Out!
And in what I can only assume is Ridley Scott dunking on Napoleon again, we see the Emperor just freeze. No orders, no plan. So his generals, apparently acting on their own, launch a cavalry charge out of desperation. But that's not what actually happened. In real life, Wellington withdrew his troops behind the ridgeline, and French Marshal Ney thought the British were retreating. Whereas in the movie, not only do the British not withdraw behind the ridgeline, they instead climb out of their fucking trenches, march towards the incoming French cavalry, and then form into squares, which is unbelievably stupid. Because as soon as the cavalry see them do that, they'd have plenty of time to pull back. But because this is a Ridley Scott movie, they mindlessly charge ahead, knowing full well what's about to happen. This is a completely clumsy, half-assed reenactment of one of the pivotal moments at Waterloo. Let me show you how it should look from a much better movie, the 1970 classic, Waterloo.
General order. The army will retire 100 paces. The army will retire 100 paces. The 27th will take position behind the Gordons. Wellington's retreating! Wellington's retreating! Leo, follow me! Well with you! Trumpeter, sound the advance! Charge! Withdraw to square! Shoot at the horses! Pile up the horses!
And that is how you show tension, stakes, and actual tactics. Not this lazy charge the squares for no reason crap. So despite the French cavalry charge being a complete disaster, Napoleon decides to order a final infantry assault. And the reason why is this.
Here! The Prussians! First over the right, Emperor!
Although the Prussians were already on the field when Napoleon ordered the final assault, he didn't lead the charge himself on horseback. In reality, he stayed at his command post, directing the attack. And with his hemorrhoids, which the movie can't stop reminding us about, he wouldn't have been able to ride like this. Yet despite all of that, Ridley Scott decides to end this battle the way he always does, by having everyone charge at the same spot on the map with no order or cohesion.
Cavalry advance, sir.
Cavalry advance.
Cause fuck it, right? And oh look, the sniper manages to hit Napoleon's hat! How cute! A sniper at Waterloo! My god. It's like that time Ridley Scott tried to sneak World War II landing crafts into Robin Hood. Remember that? Anyway, once there's nothing left to charge with, that's when Napoleon decides he's lost the battle. So he abandons his men again, turns to look at Wellington, salutes him, and that's basically it. Now, contrary to what Ridley Scott would have you believe, being the last to charge doesn't make you the victor. So why did Napoleon lose at Waterloo? Well, for one, unlike Austerlitz, Napoleon didn't get to choose the battlefield. At Austerlitz, he was meticulous, he pored over maps, he scouted the terrain, and picked the Pratzen Plateau for a reason. But at Waterloo, it was Wellington who chose the ground. And unlike in his glory days, most of Napoleon's best marshals and generals were either dead or absent, so he was left with an inexperienced army. And on top of that, Europe was no longer caught off guard by his course system. Many armies had adopted similar tactics, so his once revolutionary strategy no longer gave him an edge. So with a smaller, less experienced army, poor coordination with his marshals, terrible weather, his own health problems, and facing the combined British and Prussian forces on ground chosen by Wellington, Napoleon was simply outmaneuvered. So back in the movie, the next scene shows Napoleon's surrender aboard the HMS Bellerophon on July 15th, 1815. Well, at least it's supposed to be. But to anyone with even a passing knowledge of Napoleonic history, you know, the primary audience this movie's meant for, that is so clearly HMS Victory, Nelson's flagship, which is currently a museum piece in Portsmouth. But I guess Ridley Scott thought, sod it, who's gonna notice? Now, the reason Napoleon chose to surrender to the British was simple. He believed they treated more honourably than the Austrians, Prussians, or the Bourbons. In his mind, they might even let him retire peacefully and with grace in England. He was sorely mistaken.
Have you ever visited the English countryside? I imagine I love the Cotswolds. Soft rolling hills, gentle light.
And my dear sir, it is only by a narrow margin of opinion that you have been spared the fate of being shot. Politically, I'm afraid it's impossible for the British government to allow you to stay in England.
Napoleon is instead condemned to exile on the tiny island of St. Helena, virtually the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, and the Duke of Wellington clearly enjoys bursting Napoleon's bubble.
I'm told it's very pretty, tranquil. You don't have time to reflect.
Now that is a funny remark, except it never happened. Napoleon and Wellington never actually met, let alone sat down for breakfast together. Wellington wasn't even on the Bellerophon. Napoleon arrived in St. Helena on October 15th, 1815, and lived another 5.5 years or so before dying on May 5th, 1821. But they couldn't even get his death right. Not that I'm surprised, given everything else. It ends with Napoleon teaching some girls how to fight. Historically, he did befriend Betsy Balcom, the daughter of a local merchant who enjoyed listening to his stories, so I guess one of these girls is supposed to be her. Then the girls run off to play, leaving him alone. He sits in a chair, we hear yet another boring Josephine letter voiceover, and then Napoleon just slumps over as if he died right there on the spot. But that's not how he died, Ridley. Did you just copy the ending of The Godfather Part 3? Even the ending credits tells us he didn't die like that. Look, his final words were France Army Josephine. Well, how could they be his final words if we didn't hear him say anything? Even if he did, no one was around to hear him say it. In reality, Napoleon died in his bed on St. Helena. From late October 1816 until his death in 1821, his health got worse and worse. Like his father before him, he developed stomach cancer, and that was what ultimately killed him. And his last words are debatable, by the way. He might instead have said, France, Army, Head of the Army, or he might have said, France, Head of the Army, Josephine. But he was practically rambling, incoherent, and having a hard time getting the words out, so it's not super clear what he was trying to say. But it goes along with the movie to have him say Josephine last, so why not? The movie also does a completely disingenuous summary of Napoleon's life by just listing how many people died in all the wars he fought. He's not bloody Hitler, Ridley, he's remembered for far more than that. He's revered for his social and economic reforms, as well as his impact on education, science, and the arts, many of which still shape our modern world. That's why his body wasn't left on St. Helena. In 1840, his remains were brought back to Paris with full honours and laid to rest in a grand open crypt beneath the chapel of Les Invalides, which people still visit to this very day. I have never seen a more biased, bad-faith movie summarise an historical figure's life. But boy am I glad this is finally over. This is honestly by far the worst historical movie I have ever seen. When I think about what's wrong with this movie, we've only really explored one side of it so far, Ridley Scott's total lack of respect for the real Napoleon. But there's another problem, and it's just as bad, his complete lack of respect for you, the audience. Have a listen to this interview.
Because we seem to be inundated with superhero films, and therefore the challenge is, dare I make a big period piece because people don't like history lessons, because they don't seem to like to learn anything.
They don't seem to like to learn anything. I don't know about you, but that sounds a lot like he's calling the audience dumb. Dumb because they don't care about history. He's basically saying history is important, but if he made an historically accurate movie, no one would go see it because apparently you all hate learning anything. So according to him, his hands were tied. This is the kind of movie he had to make. But here's the kicker. When the movie came out and was torn apart by critics, historians, and audiences alike for being historically inaccurate, he suddenly got very defensive. In an interview with The Times, he was asked how he responds to people questioning the film's historical accuracy. His answer? "Excuse me, mate, were you there? No? Well, shut the fuck up then." So now all of a sudden, history's not that important to him. The fact that audiences reacted negatively to all the inaccuracies proves they do like history lessons. They like to learn stuff. Well, what a surprise! I only run a channel called History Buffs and you guys have been watching it for like a decade. Here's what I think Ridley's real issue with the audience is. It's not that you don't like history, it's that you do. Because if you like history, you're harder to fool. And Ridley clearly wanted to push his own view of Napoleon. Just look at this movie. Napoleon's portrayed as a buffoon, a creep. Even the end credits sum him up as nothing more than a body count. What does that tell you? He clearly hates Napoleon, and yet he knew audiences were willing to go pay to see a movie about him. So I bet he thought, if I show people how much of a creep and mass murderer Napoleon was, they'll all clap like seals at how bold I am for making this. But here's the issue. Ridley Scott's view of Napoleon is superficial. He actually doesn't seem to know anything about him. Take these scenes where we see Napoleon enjoying fine dining and sipping wine like some French aristocrat.
I enjoy my meals. Burgundy.
But that's not at all what Napoleon was like. He wasn't a foodie, he ate whatever was available, usually simple dishes like macaroni, and finished meals in under 10 minutes. He rarely drank wine, and when he did, it was watered down. He never got drunk, and the only time he lingered at a table was on Sundays with family, and even then, half an hour was the max. Now that doesn't sound very French or Corsican, does it? And that's the problem. Ridley Scott clearly started with a preconceived idea of who Napoleon was supposed to be. A generic wine-sipping French cliché. And instead of doing the research, he just filmed what he assumed Napoleon was like, and then gets defensive when people call him out. In that same interview with The Times, he said this about research. There are 10,000 books about Napoleon, and they're full of both truth and conjecture. But I left reading the books to the poor bastard who had to write the screenplay. Honestly, guys, if you want to watch an authentic depiction of Napoleon Bonaparte, then give this crap a wide berth. I would instead recommend you watch the far superior French-Canadian 2002 miniseries, Napoleon. Unlike Ridley Scott's version, this one actually understands who Napoleon was, and more importantly, it can articulate that to the audience. He's portrayed as charismatic, confident, a visionary, and highly intelligent with a genuine fascination for history.
This is Egypt in the days of the pharaohs. Everything is in here, even the canal.
The canal, General?
Didn't you know that the pharaohs built a canal joining the Nile to the Red Sea?
No.
Initiated under the king Nekao and completed under the Ptolemies, this prodigious work stood the test of time for almost 1,000 years.
The show also highlights Napoleon's strategic brilliance, something Ridley Scott seems completely uninterested in or incapable of understanding.
The road to Vienna, my friends. We control it. So let's try to think from the enemy's point of view. In your opinion, what will he concentrate his forces on above all?
Taking back the road and cutting off our line of communication.
Quite right.
Just let them try. We'll stop them in their tracks. We'll stop them before they even make any tracks.
Now I stop you. We are going to pretend we are abandoning the road. As though we are terrified by the force of the enemy's fire. We will turn back and retreat.
Thus encouraging the enemy to advance.
That's when he will make his mistake. Because to advance,
He will have to withdraw some of his troops from the plateau of Pratzen, and our right wing will be waiting at the foot of the plateau. They will start by retreating.
Retreating again?
Just enough for the enemy to fall into the trap, as it is a trap.
when we feel that our opponents are confident, we will stop retreating. Bernadotte and Soult will attack the plateau of Pratzen, while Lannes and you, Murat, will take the lot of them from the rear.
It sounds so simple.
It is simple. That's why they won't see it coming.
And best of all, for a film that pretends to be so invested in the relationship between Napoleon and Josephine, their introduction in this miniseries has more chemistry than the entire 3-hour and 30-minute slog of Ridley Scott's movie.
General. 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 General, I've shocked you. A soldier shocked by ladies' words.
It was not the words, madame. It was the image they evoked.
The image of a little girl frolicking in the sun?
Of a woman, naked. Beautiful image of you.
Now I'm the one who's shocked.
You shouldn't have taken the risk
The risk?
of being alone with me and the feelings you have aroused.
You wouldn't there.
No, not here, not now, but tomorrow when I see you again.
Because you presume you'll see me again.
Yes, I will. Won't I?
And that right there perfectly sums up why this movie fails. It's not just historically inaccurate, it doesn't get Napoleon, it doesn't get Josephine, and worst of all, it doesn't respect the audience enough to even try. If you want an authentic depiction of one of history's greatest figures, don't waste 3.5 hours on this rubbish. watch something made by people who actually cared. Like the Napoleon miniseries, or even better, the 1970 classic Waterloo. But in any case, I'm done. I'm done. I hate this movie. I hate this movie with every fibre of my being, and I never want to review another Ridley Scott movie again.
I'm just here for the games. Gladiator.
Well, there goes the last lingering thread of my sanity. But if you want to make things a little easier for me, please remember to check out the sponsor for today's episode, War Thunder. You can play it for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile using my links in the pinned comment or video description. New and returning players on PC and console who haven't played in 6 months will also get a massive bonus pack, but it's only available for a limited time.